The first time anyone noticed the enslaved man they later called the accountant, he was standing silently near the counting table on the wide porch of the main house. His eyes lowered, his posture careful, his presence almost invisible. It was the summer of 1860, and the southern estate stretched endlessly beyond the columns of the mansion, rows of cotton shimmering beneath the punishing sun. Wagons creaked across the yard, overseers shouted orders, and ledgers lay open beside scales stained with dust and sweat. The plantation thrived on numbers, on tallies of cotton bales, on valuations of land and bodies, on columns of profit and loss that determined who would be rewarded and who would be punished. No one imagined that the quiet man who carried ink and fresh paper to the master's desk was studying every mark written on those pages. He had not always been assigned to the house. Years earlier, he had worked in the fields, his hands raw from picking cotton, his back bent beneath endless expectation. But he had learned quickly that survival required observation. He listened when the overseer recited weights. He memorized figures spoken aloud during disputes. He traced shapes of letters in dirt when no one watched. The master of the estate prided himself on efficiency and believed literacy among the enslaved to be rare and harmless if limited. When a previous bookkeeper fell ill, the master required someone obedient and discreet to assist temporarily. The quiet field hand was chosen because he seemed compliant and unremarkable. Inside the study, the accountant discovered the true machinery of the estate. Heavy books bound in leather filled the shelves. Each page carried careful handwriting listing purchases of tools, shipments of cotton, debts owed to northern traders, insurance policies on enslaved laborers, and private transactions that never reached official records. He was instructed to copy totals neatly, to calculate sums under supervision, to ensure nothing appeared disordered when investors visited. At first he did exactly as commanded. He sharpened quills, prepared ink, and repeated numbers softly to himself so he would not forget. But as months passed, he began to understand that the ledgers told more than financial stories. They recorded punishments disguised as losses. They listed names of enslaved people beside monetary values adjusted after illness or injury. They detailed secret agreements between the estate owner and neighboring planters to conceal debts. He saw how shipments were underreported to avoid taxation and how certain sales of enslaved children were never acknowledged publicly. Every column of figures concealed human suffering translated into currency. The master trusted the stability of ink. He believed that once something was written in his books, it became truth beyond question. He boasted to guests that his estate was among the most profitable in the county, immune to rumors of financial strains spreading across the South as tensions with the North intensified. He entertained bankers beneath chandeliers, presenting immaculate records as proof of security. The accountant stood behind him during these performances, holding additional volumes, turning pages when instructed, never revealing what he had memorized. At night, when the house quieted and cicadas hummed outside shuttered windows, the accountant sometimes remained alone in the study under the pretense of finishing calculations. He began copying fragments of information onto scraps of discarded paper. He hid them inside the lining of a wooden crate stored near the kitchen quarters. He knew discovery would mean severe punishment or death, yet he also understood that numbers possessed power. If revealed correctly, they could dismantle illusions carefully constructed by the master. Whispers of national conflict reached the plantation by newspaper and rumor. Talk of secession unsettled merchants. Credit tightened. Cotton prices fluctuated unpredictably. The master grew anxious but maintained outward confidence. He increased production demands, forcing longer hours in the fields to compensate for mounting debt. He insisted that everything remained under control because the books proved it so. The accountant observed a widening gap between written claims and lived reality. One afternoon, a visiting investor requested to examine older ledgers for comparison. The master hesitated before granting access, claiming some volumes were misplaced. The accountant recognized fear behind the polite smile. He had already seen discrepancies that would alarm any careful reader, debts disguised as advances, payments recorded twice to inflate revenue, insurance claims prepared in anticipation of potential rebellion. The estate's prosperity was partly fiction sustained by selective arithmetic. In the quarters, the enslaved community sensed tension though they lacked access to specific details. Rations shrank slightly, Punishments became harsher when quotas were not met. Rumors circulated that the master might sell portions of the land. The accountant listened quietly, aware that the fate of many depended on forces hidden within pages only he and the master truly understood. He began to consider whether the records could serve not just as evidence but as leverage. The turning point arrived when a shipment of cotton was lost during river transport. The master had insured the cargo for a value far exceeding its actual worth. To claim compensation, he altered previous entries to exaggerate production numbers. He ordered the accountant to rewrite several months of totals, instructing him to destroy original drafts. As he complied outwardly, the accountant carefully preserved fragments of the authentic figures. He realized that the estate's survival depended on deception that could unravel if exposed to creditors. Meanwhile, an abolitionist network operated quietly in nearby towns, gathering testimonies and documents revealing the brutal economics of slavery. Though direct contact between the accountant and these groups had not yet occurred, the possibility of communication lingered in his thoughts. He understood that proof carried greater weight than rumor. If the true ledgers surfaced, they could trigger investigations, lawsuits, perhaps even seizure of property. The master's temper grew volatile as financial pressure mounted. He accused overseers of incompetence and blamed enslaved laborers for reduced output. Yet he never suspected the most dangerous threat stood inches from his desk each day, calculating sums with steady hands. The accountant maintained a mask of obedience, responding softly, avoiding eye contact, never revealing that he now possessed a parallel record in memory and hidden scraps. By late autumn of 1860, political uncertainty deepened across the South. Secession debates intensified. Creditors demanded reassurance. The master prepared to travel to a regional bank to secure additional loans, planning to present his ledgers as evidence of stability. On the eve of his departure, he instructed the accountant to organize all volumes chronologically. As he arranged them on the desk, the accountant felt the weight of decision pressing upon him. The numbers he had preserved could expose falsifications at the precise moment the estate sought trust. Standing alone in the study after midnight, he opened the earliest volume and traced the neat handwriting that had once intimidated him. He compared it with the altered entries written more recently. The contrast revealed a story of gradual desperation hidden beneath confident signatures. He knew that if these contradictions reached the right eyes, the estate's foundation would crack. Outside, wind moved through cotton stalks like distant whispers. Within the walls of the mansion, wealth still appeared secure. Servants prepared trunks for the master's journey. Lamps flickered in corridors lined with portraits of ancestors who had built fortunes from land and bondage. No one sensed that the destruction of the estate would begin not with fire or rebellion, but with ink and arithmetic preserved by a man they considered property. As dawn approached, the accountant concealed selected pages inside a false bottom he had crafted within a supply chest scheduled for delivery to town. His movements were precise, controlled, practiced. He understood that he was setting events in motion that could alter every life tied to the plantation. Whether the outcome would bring freedom, chaos, or harsher repression remained uncertain. Yet he believed that truth recorded carefully could not remain buried forever. When the master departed later that morning, confident in the authority of his books, the accountant watched the carriage disappear down the dirt road. He returned to the study, closed the remaining ledgers, and placed them exactly where they belonged. The estate continued its routines, unaware that the quiet man among them had transformed numbers into a weapon. The unraveling had begun, and he would travel through courts, banks, and whispers across the county, all traced back to pages written by an enslaved accountant who refused to let falsehood remain permanent. When the carriage wheels faded into the distance and the dust settled along the road leading away from the estate, the house felt strangely hollow, as if the walls themselves sensed the absence of the master's authority. Yet the routines did not pause. Cotton still had to be weighed, meals still prepared, orders still delivered from overseer to field. The accountant returned to his position near the counting table, his posture unchanged, his expression unreadable. Outwardly, nothing had shifted. Inwardly, everything had. The supply chest he had prepared was scheduled to be delivered to a merchant in town who regularly handled shipments of paper, ink, and tools. Hidden within its false bottom were copied figures, dates, and calculations that contradicted the official ledgers now stacked neatly in the study. He had memorized the path the chest would take, the names of the men responsible for transporting it, the approximate hour it would arrive. He knew that if intercepted prematurely, the consequences would be immediate and brutal. Yet he also understood that secrecy was already suffocating the estate. Exposure carried danger, but silence guaranteed continued exploitation. Inside the mansion, the mistress attempted to maintain composure in her husband's absence. She trusted the books as fully as he did, believing that written numbers were as solid as brick foundations. She summoned the accountant to verify recent totals, asking whether projected yields aligned with previous months. He responded with calm precision, providing figures that matched the altered entries. His voice did not tremble. His eyes did not linger. He had become fluent in the language of deception, even as he prepared to dismantle it. In the quarters, murmurs spread that the master's trip concerned money. Some feared increased debts would lead to families being sold. Others speculated that the looming national crisis might disrupt trade entirely. The accountant listened carefully, saying little, but he understood that the estate's survival depended on external credit. If lenders lost confidence, the plantation structure would fracture quickly. Land could be seized, assets could be auctioned, people could be transferred like furniture to satisfy obligations. The stakes extended far beyond reputation. Days passed with no immediate sign that the hidden documents had reached receptive hands. The accountant performed his duties without deviation. He recalculated shipment weights, recorded tool replacements, and prepared summaries for the mistress to send by courier to her husband. Each official report contained the same inflated numbers that had long sustained the illusion of prosperity. Yet beneath the surface, a second narrative was already traveling beyond the plantation gates. In town, the merchant who received the supply chest noticed nothing unusual at first. He stored it among other deliveries, intending to sort contents later. It was not until a clerk, searching for additional parchment, discovered the concealed compartment that the secret emerged. The clerk was literate, cautious, and connected to a network of individuals increasingly skeptical of plantation accounting practices. He recognized the significance of detailed financial contradictions, especially at a time when southern estates were scrambling to secure loans amid political unrest. The copied pages did not accuse directly. They did not include emotional testimony. They offered something more powerful, arithmetic proof. Columns showing production lower than reported, insurance valuations exceeding actual shipments, debts shifted between accounts to conceal insolvency, signatures repeated besides suspicious adjustments. The clarity of the discrepancies made denial difficult. The clerk quietly shared the findings with a banker who had recently extended credit to the estate. Meanwhile, unaware that scrutiny had begun, the master arrived at the regional bank confident in his presentation. He laid out his official ledgers across a polished desk, explaining fluctuations as minor and temporary. He emphasized stable output and strong asset value. For years, his reputation had shielded him from deeper questioning, but this time, the banker's demeanor was measured and distant. He asked to review older records and inquired about insurance claims with unusual specificity. The master sensed something had shifted. The banker mentioned receiving information suggesting inconsistencies in reported yields. He did not reveal his source, only that verification was necessary before approving additional credit. The master dismissed the suggestion as rumor fueled by political agitation, yet he agreed to submit copies of certain pages for independent review. He believed his careful alterations were undetectable. Back at the estate, tension thickened in the air without clear explanation. The mistress received a terse letter indicating delays in loan approval. Overseers were instructed to push labor harder to demonstrate productivity. Extra patrols were ordered at night, ostensibly to prevent escape, but also to project control. The accountant continued his silent observations, recognizing that pressure was mounting precisely as anticipated. A week later, a formal notice arrived requesting access to original shipment receipts and insurance documentation. The banker's office required comparison with third-party transport records. The mistress grew unsettled. She summoned the accountant repeatedly, demanding reassurance that all books were accurate. He maintained composure, explaining figures as written. He never contradicted the official narrative, yet he did not volunteer explanations for inconsistencies that would soon become undeniable. In town, transport logs revealed that certain cotton shipments weighed significantly less than the amounts declared for insurance. Dates did not align. Insurance claims had been filed before shipments even departed the dock. When these findings were placed beside the copied pages from the hidden compartment, a pattern emerged too precise to ignore. What might have been dismissed as clerical error now appeared intentional. The master returned abruptly, his confidence fractured. He entered the study and immediately began reviewing volumes, flipping pages rapidly, scanning totals. He questioned the accountant sharply about entries made during previous months. The accountant responded with steady clarity, referencing dates and instructions given. Every alteration had been ordered by the master himself. There was no discrepancy in handwriting, no visible trace of tampering. The books reflected exactly what the master had dictated. Days later, a representative from the bank arrived unannounced. He requested to inspect storage facilities and confirm inventory counts. For the first time, the plantation's authority faced external scrutiny within its own boundaries. Overseers stiffened. Workers paused in confusion as strangers measured bales and recorded numbers. The totals did not match the ledger claims. The confrontation in the study was quiet, but devastating. The banker's representative presented evidence of inflated valuations and misreported shipments. He spoke carefully, emphasizing contractual obligations and potential legal consequences. The master attempted to deflect responsibility, blaming clerical mistakes and transport errors. Yet the pattern of manipulation was too systematic. Throughout the exchange, the accountant stood beside a bookshelf, hands clasped, eyes lowered. He was not addressed directly. No one imagined he possessed independent knowledge. Yet he recognized each figure cited as one he had once copied in secret. The estate's credibility was unraveling line by line, column by column. Within days, credit was suspended. Suppliers demanded immediate payment for outstanding goods. Rumors spread across neighboring plantations that the once formidable estate faced investigation. Prospective buyers hesitated to engage in trade. The illusion of unshakable prosperity dissolved rapidly, replaced by whispered speculation. In the quarters, the enslaved community sensed upheaval in subtle shifts. Overseers barked fewer confident orders. Meals were reduced further. Conversations among white staff carried anxiety rather than authority. Though the workers did not know the exact cause, they understood that power was weakening at its source. The master spent long hours alone in the study, poring over ledgers as if numbers might rearrange themselves into innocence. He never considered that the destruction began not with rebellion or external attack, but with arithmetic preserved by someone he believed incapable of agency. The accountant continued his duties flawlessly, even as the foundation of the estate cracked beneath accumulated deceit. By the close of that tense month, formal proceedings were initiated to assess the estate's liabilities. Land valuations were recalculated. Insurance claims were frozen pending inquiry. The plantation that once projected invulnerability now stood exposed, not through violence but through the quiet endurance of recorded truth. The second act of its ruin had begun, and the ledgers that once protected its power had become instruments of collapse. The formal inquiry did not arrive with spectacle or raised voices. It unfolded slowly like ink spreading across damp paper, deliberate and irreversible. Officials returned with additional clerks, requesting access to correspondence, warehouse receipts, tax declarations, and transport contracts. The plantation house, once a symbol of untouchable authority, now felt like a place under quiet siege. Doors remained open longer than usual. Cabinets were unlocked under watchful eyes. Every document became subject to examination. The master attempted to regain control by projecting indignation. He insisted that minor inconsistencies were common in agricultural enterprise. Weather altered yields. River conditions affected shipment weights. Clerks occasionally miscalculated. Yet the pattern of discrepancies extended beyond chance. Repeated overstatements of cotton production aligned precisely with inflated insurance policies. Debts were shifted between seasonal ledgers in ways that disguised cumulative insolvency. It was not a single error but a structure of manipulation. The accountant observed from the periphery, summoned frequently to retrieve volumes from high shelves or confirm dates of entry. Each time he stepped forward, he did so with measured calm. He answered only what was asked. He never volunteered information, yet his precision made contradictions sharper. When an official asked whether a certain figure had been copied from an earlier draft, he responded truthfully that he wrote what he was instructed to record. The implication lingered without accusation. Word spread beyond the estate boundaries. Neighboring planters began distancing themselves, wary of association with financial scandal. Merchants demanded immediate payment for overdue supplies. Creditors who had once extended generous terms now tightened conditions abruptly. The master discovered that reputation, once damaged, deteriorated quickly. Letters requesting patience were met with curt replies referencing contractual obligations. Inside the quarters, anxiety deepened. The enslaved community recognized that financial collapse often resulted in sales. Families whispered about potential separation. Mothers held children more tightly at night. The uncertainty carried its own weight, heavy and persistent. The accountant felt that burden intensely. He had intended to expose falsehood, not to accelerate suffering. Yet he also understood that the system itself guaranteed harm regardless of temporary stability. As officials compared warehouse inventories with ledger claims, the gap became undeniable. Entire shipments had been valued at weights, never physically present. Insurance payments were pending on goods that records suggested were exaggerated. The bank initiated proceedings to recover losses. The estate's land and assets were assessed for liquidation potential. The master's demeanor shifted from defiance to desperation. He began searching for someone to blame. Overseers were interrogated. Clerks were accused of negligence. Even the accountant felt the sharp edge of suspicion for the first time. One evening, the master confronted him privately in the study, closing the door with force. He demanded to know whether any documents had been removed or altered without permission. The accountant met his gaze steadily. He replied that every entry he made was dictated and reviewed. He reminded the master that he lacked authority to change figures independently. His tone remained respectful but firm. The master studied him intensely, searching for signs of deceit. He saw only composure. He dismissed him with a warning that loyalty would be remembered when decisions were made. Outside that room, however, the machinery of accountability continued turning. The banker's office shared findings with regional authorities. Questions arose regarding fraudulent insurance claims, which could carry legal consequences beyond simple debt recovery. The estate's standing within elite circles eroded further. Invitations ceased. Social visits dwindled. The mistress attempted to salvage dignity by hosting a modest gathering, hoping to signal stability. Few attended. Those who did spoke cautiously, avoiding direct reference to the investigation while making clear through distance that association carried risk. The grandeur of the house felt hollow beneath polite conversation. Meanwhile, the hidden copies of authentic figures circulated discreetly among those reviewing the case. They served as baseline evidence against which official ledgers were measured. The clarity of comparison removed doubt. What had been presented as minor error now appeared deliberate inflation. The accountant had ensured that proof existed beyond the master's control. Tension on the plantation manifested in harsher discipline. Overseers, fearing unemployment, intensified demands on field workers to demonstrate productivity. Exhaustion deepened. Tempers flared. The accountant recognized that collapse often provoked cruelty before resolution. He wrestled silently with the knowledge that truth alone did not guarantee justice in the immediate moment. As autumn approached, formal notice arrived that certain parcels of land would be placed under lien until debts were settled. The master read the document aloud in disbelief, his voice shaking. For generations his family had expanded holdings steadily. The notion of contraction felt like humiliation. He retreated to the study for hours, emerging pale and withdrawn. One afternoon, officials requested private interviews with household staff. They sought clarification about record-keeping procedures. The accountant was questioned regarding how figures were transferred between draft sheets and final ledgers. He described the process accurately, explaining that totals were often recalculated at the master's direction before being finalized. He did not accuse, but he did not shield. The interviewers noted his literacy with interest. An enslaved man capable of detailed arithmetic contradicted common assumptions held by many present. They realized that the precision of falsified accounts required competent execution. Responsibility therefore lay with instruction rather than ignorance. The estate's legal advisors recommended settlement negotiations to avoid criminal charges. Such negotiations required acknowledgement of misrepresentation. The master resisted fiercely, fearing that admission would destroy remaining credibility. Yet refusal risked harsher penalties. He found himself cornered by his own inflated numbers. In the quarters, rumors intensified that portions of the property might be sold. The accountant moved among fellow workers quietly, offering neither false hope nor despair. He knew that whatever outcome emerged would alter the landscape permanently. The plantation as it existed could not survive sustained financial exposure. One evening, as twilight settled across the fields, the master summoned the accountant again. His tone was subdued rather than angry. He asked whether any records existed that might clarify confusion in his favor. The question hung heavily in the air. For a moment, the accountant sensed recognition flicker in the master's eyes, as if suspicion had finally taken shape. He answered carefully that the books in the study contained all official entries. That was true. The copies hidden elsewhere were not official. The master dismissed him slowly, his certainty fractured. The power dynamic had shifted, though it remained unspoken. Within weeks, negotiations concluded with an agreement requiring partial liquidation of assets to repay creditors. Several outlying tracts of land were scheduled for auction. Equipment and surplus livestock would be sold. The estate's scale would shrink significantly. The illusion of boundless prosperity had dissolved into documented liability. The destruction was not explosive. There were no flames consuming buildings. Instead, it unfolded through notices, signatures, valuations, and auctions. Each step traced back to discrepancies first preserved in secret by a man forced to write numbers he knew were false. The ledgers that once symbolized dominance now served as instruments of accountability. As winter approached, the plantation stood quieter, diminished in both wealth and reputation. The accountant continued to record figures as required, yet the atmosphere had changed irrevocably. The third phase of ruin had revealed that arithmetic, when preserved honestly, could erode foundations built on deception. What remained uncertain was how the final consequences would reshape every life bound to the estate's fading power.